What's up? This is Miles per hour. Today I want to make a very rambly, off-the-shoot video on mixing and mastering, at least my workflow when it comes to that, or lack of mixing and mastering actually, because I have this workflow where I just kind of do it as I go on, and I'm sure many others do. It's just something that I've learned throughout making dubstep for so long, and bass music. It's very different from that industry level sound where like you got to use like ozone and mastering compressors and headroom of like 6 dB. And that's not to say that it doesn't work, but if we're talking about like getting stuff loud, like skrillex style, like you kind of throw all of that industry stuff out the window, because to make a song sound glued in that way, you got to really push stuff and maximize it to the absolute threshold. So this is an example. This is a trap wink inspired type thing. I was listening to his EP that came out. It's so good. I wanted to give my try on that bongo trap thing. This is what it sounds like. Yeah, I think this is a really good example of how you can maximize these elements to make it sound nice and glued. Especially because trap is like, it's a lot more raw and like, it's less harmonically rich, but it's not so like crystally and like full of like these super delicate and fragile high-end elements. You can really kind of squeeze stuff. As you can see, all this stuff is just like visualizers and stuff for metering, but all I have is just the gclip, and it's literally, that's it. That's all I have on my master. And sometimes I'll put like an OTT to like maximize a bit of that background. I mean, this is all I'm running. Like, this is the only thing I have on my master that's doing anything to the sound. I think it really helps. You know, you can get so far with just a gclip or a clipper on the master. Here are the drums here. Okay, that snare could use a bit of EQing on the high end, but as you can see, this thing is peaking at 13 dB. Not 13 like under zero, like this is going 13 dB over the absolute digital clipping limit. So we're clipping it off like that. This is kind of an interesting way about mixing, because that means you don't have headroom. Like, you're absolutely like just pushing stuff through the clipper, and that is your mix, or your master rather. I think there's a mixing and mastering video on Disciple with Fox Stevenson, and I learned that from him initially. And then I started to see that a lot of other producers, like Phonon and Sizzy, were doing that, where they just maximize their drums first and then base it off of that. And generally, you can just clip stuff through. If you want to get a cleaner mix, I think that just comes down to carving and limiting, like using Pro L, like very smart and clean limiters. But with trap, I think you can get away with that aggressive style. I'll go ahead and show the kick. Now, when it comes with like trap kicks, they aren't so like clicky and punchy and full of harmonic content. It's literally like a very thumpy kick. Like here, like I'm usually like a visual kind of learner. So what I like to do is I like to render out the waveform. So in this case, I'm using resampling. So the bump is like around like 600 hertz. So generally kicks will sometimes start from like 10K and then sweep downwards. But this is starting like half. So there isn't much room to have that click. Let me actually pull out like a drum from here to show you what I'm talking about. This one's good. You can see how much more like there's like a super like this sine wave is squeezed, and then like it flows out. While this one's more like, it's almost like if you started it from here, where like there's no click to it. And I just think it helps. It makes it fit. Like, you can get some really nice sizzle out of it when you compare it with like high-end content. I'm just like smashing this through the clipper. I have the kilohertz transient shaper here on attacks on max 100%, 236 speed, and a bit of sustain. Like if I turn this off, it sounds too clean. Like there's no glue to it. If I play the track without it, you can clearly hear the side chain. Like, you can visualize the pumping effect that the side chain's doing. Like I mean, look at that. That's just that. So I always make my drums hit 0 dB. It all depends on how like harsh you want the distortion to be, but at least make them hit 0 dB so you have like a nice reference to go by. It glues it in a way almost like sidechain does, but in a very like in a dominant way. Like it's not much about like carving out the volume, but rather like squeezing in the volume, if that makes sense. Like it's just trying to fit in as much as it can. And by making it so loud beforehand, it kind of takes over anything else in the mix. It also just has a nice clip sound. When you pair it with this white noise, it just goes so well together. And then snare, same thing. This can be very tough to do because snares can be very harsh. But I'm just doing the same thing. I'm pushing the attack, and it's being clipped. And notice that I don't have the clipper on here. And that allows it to push through the gclip instead of the transient shaper plugin itself, which will actually allow it to clash with the other elements in the track and actually create that gluing effect. Just want to make it a little bit more aggressive and brighter. You can see I'm cutting out as much as I can of the low end and the harshness. It's speaking like 12, so it's definitely loud enough. Like, I mean, you can clearly tell like it's being clipped off. And to me, having that clip sound just makes it sound so nice and concise. Now, obviously, you can clip stuff to whatever extreme like lengths you want. But I just think having that nice assurance of hitting 0 dB is more than enough. I don't really have to go beyond that kind of clipping. Other than that, like if I push it more, it'll obviously sound like super distorted. And let me do that. Let me push the. Like that's just too much. I think that's just about right. I don't think that's too like distracting. It melts really nicely. Hats, when it comes to levels, you kind of want it to be just enough to where it complements the kick. Basically trying to fill in that fake clipping sound by introducing high-end elements. So that's why I had this white noise here, because without it and the hats, you can clearly tell that it's clipping. Like that is very much a clipped kick. But by hiding it and masking it with some noise, you can get rid of that super distorted nature, and that'll allow you to get away with more clipping. So I'll usually have the hats sit at a level where it just kind of sizzles with that kick as it goes through the clipper. You can see like this fuzzy stuff that appears around is the high-end element. I think it helps. It helps make it sound less distorted. Yeah, hats, yeah, they're pretty much, yeah, they're standard. They're hitting like -4, but I want to kind of make this well known that perceived loudness and actual meter loudness are very different. I'll talk about that later, but just have an ear for it. Make sure, either have like a reference track or something. Just try to make it complement the kick is basically what I'm trying to say with the hats. Next up is the effects. I mean, this can also be very different based on the track, but I like having my effects kind of wide and very like background-ish. And I think that actually comes down to being effective with the mids and sides. So I think everyone here knows that music exists in mono and stereo. The idea is that with mono, there's just one channel, and with stereo, there's 2 channels. But technically, there's still mono within stereo. Stereo, it has like this other side to it called mid-side. I'll show you that better here. If I use the utility in Ableton, which you can actually, if you click on the width, right-click and hit mid-side, you get this mid-side thing going on. And if I play the effects, you can hear the difference. I would wear headphones for this. So you can see that the sides is really weird. It's like, it just doesn't sound right, and that's because that's pure stereo information. If you hear the whole track, so I'm not making the track mono. This is just the elements that are already in the track that are mono by itself. I'm not like turning mono on or like using just the left channel. It's just like removing all stereo information. Well, if I go to stereo, it just sounds so like weirdly full. Like it surrounds you in a unique way that mono just doesn't. By using that, you can kind of fit it in the mix. It's not clashing with anything that's mono, but rather taking up that unused space of the stereo field. So I usually like put auto pan or reverb on stuff, so that way it has a nice space to it. Like I think, yeah, like I'll have like auto pans where like it's going left and right. I think some of these elements are just already stereo, so I don't need to like add it. What's the other one? It's just a really good way of like making stuff loud without actually having to squeeze it in with the mono stuff. You can take advantage of that unused stereo field. So that's effects. We can go on to like the bass, like the drop stuff. Now this is kind of an interesting style because there's not really, I don't think there's like a proper bass. The only thing that's like bass-ish is that 808 and this little glitch fill that is just a sample. Remember how I talked about how drums should be the loudest in your mix? The second thing should be the sub. I want to really dive deep into this one because it's kind of interesting. This is a great example of that perceived loudness versus meter loudness. What is this hitting? This is hitting like negative 3 almost. If I go in the master, actually, if you get the spectrum, put it on the master, and then turn off this auto, set this to -10 or like the maximum. It basically like eliminates all of this like mid and high end information. And you can see what the loudest fundamental like peak is in your track. And this track is like the sub is peaking at around -174 dB, which is quite a lot. But that's because there's no like major harmonic stuff that's making it balanced. But technically, this is still not as loud as that kick. Like this isn't being pushed through the clipper. If you notice, like while the kick is like peaking at 13 dB, the sub is just like sitting in its same spot. Like it's just chilling there. And I think that's really interesting because it shows you how like perceived loudness and metering is just so much different. Like the kick technically doesn't sound as loud as the sub. Like maybe it does, but because it's so short, your brain just doesn't have enough time to consider it as like loud. While the sub is so much more longer, your brain can easily tell that it's louder. Mr. Bill also has a great video on that about copycat sub that explains what I mean. But basically, I want my sub to be loud enough, but also still have that nice headroom for some of the other elements before the clipper. So I'm just using distortion, like basic distortion, but I'm dipping some of the harmonics here. Because by having all of those harmonics there, those like low mids, they take up too much space where I can't fit in the other like the percussive like bongos or the rave stabs. So making sure you have headroom by removing as much of the low end, like the stuff you don't need, can really help maximize the loudness, the perceived loudness of your track. I guess we can go into the bongos. This is obviously like the part where I ripped off Wink. But if I turn this off. But there's a lot of like low mid information. You can tell like it's clipping and stuff. But you know, I've add OTT, soothe, I distort it. Well, not distort it, but I guess yeah, I'm maximizing the bongo first. Got some EQ, and this is where I'm removing that low mid stuff. Soothe 2 for some harshness. And you can see I'm like dipping. And it makes all the difference, really, by doing that. By just removing as much low end, I can squeeze it in more with the sub and not have it, you know, distort too much. It's very similar to that hat thing that we're doing, where we're just trying to get to the point where it just barely sizzles. And by removing that low end, you free up so much more room without actually having to bring it down in terms of volume. And the stabs are very similar, although these have a lot more stereo content. Look at the metering for this conga thing. This is hitting like above the 0 dB. or just barely. Well, the sub is still like -3. That shows you that the upper like harmonics up can have a lot more leeway with how far you can push stuff. Like you can tell like where the hits are just by looking at the waveform. It's like the super noisy stuff. I'm like maximizing, I'm like pushing stuff through the clipper to squeeze out as much as I can without like any regards of headroom. Because if I were to turn off all of these, like the transient shaper stuff, it would just sound so flat and boring. Like there's no energy to it. Like let me bring everything down -6 dB. Let's try -10 because I feel like the clipping stuff kind of changes it. That transient shaper thing is just doing too much. Obviously, because it's quieter, it's just not going to sound as satisfying or like kind of full. But you can see by really maximizing, like you can see like all of these like transients are there because the bongos are so much louder than the sub. So by clipping that off, you kind of maximize it and force it to squeeze with that sub. It almost has like a more compressed sound because it's just so raw. And there's a way to do like dynamic mixes right. There is a method to it, but in my opinion, it just sounds so much better to really push stuff through. And this sounds all right too. It sounds kind of clean, but something about the way that the punch is, it's the way it's so aggressive. It glues everything perfectly. I keep saying glue, but I mean that is the only way to describe it. It's so full and like cut from the same cloth. So hopefully that made sense. I don't know if it did. This is kind of like a freestyle one. I didn't really script anything. I just went for it. But let me know if this actually helps, because then I might consider doing some more videos on like production and tips and whatnot. If you guys have any questions or any like requests for like video ideas, please feel free to let me know, because I'd love to do it. Yeah. Anyways, thanks for watching. Peace out.